everyone, please welcome Erica Baker.
Hello, hi. Yeah, I'm a professional, so I'm going to do this talk with wine. Welcome. How are you all? Today we're going to do a diversity and inclusion postmortem. First of all, thank you all for coming to this. Thank you, Tess, for putting it on. Thank you, Chain, and one more. Credit Karma, sorry. I knew it started with a C, and I was like, I can't. Okay, thank you, Chain and Credit Karma, for hosting. This is fantastic. I'm a big fan of Grace Notes. I went to the first one. I did not know that I helped create it, so thanks. But yeah, big fan of Tess. Tess is fantastic, and I'm really just excited to be speaking here. So we're going to do today a diversity and inclusion postmortem. So here we go. Hello again, my name is Erica. I am Erica Joy, if you like. That is how people on the internet know me. People seem to think that's my last name, Joy. Baker, my last name, but you can call me whatever. I respond to hey you, it's fine. I'm an engineering manager at Patreon, senior engineering manager technically, but I think it sounds weird as I am a senior engineering manager, so I don't say that part, but we are hiring also, so talk to me if you want to work in infrastructure, DevOps, backend, finance, literally every job we're hiring for right now. We just got a big fundraising round, so join us. Yeah, so I've been working on diversity and inclusion in the tech industry for a long time, really long time. And I'm kind of exhausted at this point. We're approaching the 10-year anniversary of the first forays into improving diversity and inclusion in tech. That's a long time to have been working on it. I have not been working on it for 10 years. I think I would have been done by now. At this point, the industry has spent well over $500 million on D&I with little to no improvements to show for it. Look at all the zeros. It's a lot of money. Someone should give me that much money. I'll do great things. So $500 million we spent, and we're still in the same place that we were when we first started talking about all this. Like, nothing really has happened, not a zilch. Diversity numbers remain stagnant. We see little to no representation of underrepresented minorities at the executive and board level. We don't see all genders represented at that level. Barely any women, nobody of any other gender at that level. It's really sad. And reports of harassment at several companies have begun to pour out, and it's getting a bit ridiculous. VC money for people of color, especially women of color, might as well be non-existent. And again, that many zeros, $500 million spent on D&I in this industry. And for any project, especially in the tech industry, when you see that kind of spend with such a very low, very, very low return on investment, you're facing a pretty major failure in that project. And in tech, when we have a major failure, we have a postmortem. And so we are going to do a postmortem today. This is meant to be an interactive talk. So if you see something that I've missed in our postmortem, and I'm going to exit out of this screen, I'm going to try to. Technology is hard. It is not a blameless postmortem. No. This is an actual postmortem, written postmortem format on GitHub because we're engineers, and that's what we do. Yes, come through, engineers. All right, so we're gonna start with the impact. I said that part already. I've already talked about the summary of this. Current status of this postmortem, of this failure, ongoing. Action items assigned to several people. None of them seem to be doing anything, so we're in progress. Impact right now is too great to be accurately quantified, but I bet all of y'all feel it. Yeah, so root causes. Some cascading failures due to the following: bias, reliance on pattern matching, cargo culting, gatekeeping, harassment, not added. Should I add that there? Yes. Harassment. Oh, no, come on. Get it over there. There. Spaces, not tabs, y'all.
What's cargo culting?
Cargo culting is basically copying what other companies do, taking their culture and copying it whole hog. So basically we've got Google, but in tiny, tiny form, all over Silicon Valley. Yeah. So detection of the current issues we've been having, Tracy Chow started tracking women in engineering and tech in 2013. With company diversity reports soon to follow, we'll get into why in a minute, a pattern of poor results soon appeared. Lessons learned, what went well. Implementation and monitoring of diversity numbers quickly alerted us to a low presence of all intersections of URMs and women in the tech industry. Also, probably we're not tracking yet, but we should be, low presence of people who are from different age groups than 20s. We should probably be tracking that. I'll add that in later on. What went wrong? We have not yet defined what good outcomes look like. Nobody says what they want their company to look like as a result of their increased diversity inclusion. They always say, oh, we are so passionate about diversity inclusion, but never say what they really want to do. We've not created any methods of accountability. We're not measuring and reporting indicators of inclusion like retention, promotions, pay equity, and also I would say how many people have, taken a settlement for their harassment suits. We're not monitoring across all groups and intersections to include age, veteran status, LGBTQ status, and disability status. Too much, way too much reliance on unconscious bias training that very few people who actually need to be there go to, turns out. Companies have not responded well to reports of harassment. To date, there have been no reports of apologies to any employees that have experienced harassment. Have y'all heard of any apologies to any of the numerous women who have come out to say that they have been harassed? Any of the men? Anybody from any gender group? No? No apologies at all? Right, because companies are not owning their shit. We have not yet implemented safe methods for people to speak out that don't result in them being subjected to more harassment. Every time someone speaks up, they get brigaded, they get harassed, they feel like maybe they shouldn't have spoken up at all. And we need to solve for that so more people feel comfortable speaking up. Numbers have stayed flat. Oh, where we got lucky, numbers have stayed flat instead of dropping. When I wrote this, that was true. But then we just got a report recently that showed that numbers for people of color, Black people and Hispanic people, have dropped, right? So numbers are actually dropping. We're gonna change that. Actually, it's not even where we got lucky. So we're gonna say numbers have stayed flat instead of dropping for women. And that's about the only group that has stayed flat. Indicating that for some reason people still want to come work here. I don't understand why I wouldn't want to. Had someone told me about the tech industry before I started, I probably would have continued on my path trying to be a lawyer. Despite lack of improvement, people still want to improve diversity and inclusion. People still want to work on this. I don't know why. We haven't had any improvement. It's like, I've described it as Sisyphus continuously pushing a bucket of acid up the hill, right? Like every day, the acid pours on you, working on this, and you keep going and doing it anyway. I don't know why we do that. I think because we want it to be better. Many companies have avoided Uber-style public tire fires, despite being equally problematic. It's because they have really big settlements. They offer a lot of money to people who really need it, because it turns out the people who get harassed most often tend to be people like women and people of color who really can't afford to just go out and speak up without taking that settlement because they won't get a job afterwards, right? So the timeline, where this all started, early 2008. And 2008, y'all, is where this started, like 10 years. Mike Swift from the San Jose Mercury News filed a Freedom of Information Act request asking for demographic data for 15 tech companies. And those companies responded by saying, we're going to sue you. We are not going to follow the Freedom of Information Act request because they're going to cause us commercial harm. This is companies saying, telling us our diversity numbers will cause us, or telling y'all our diversity numbers will cause us commercial harm. So they knew that they were bad. They didn't want to talk about it in 2008. In 2011, 3 years later, CNN asked those same companies, plus 5 more, to release their EEO-1 reports. And for those who don't know, EEO-1 reports are the reports that companies over 100 employees have to file to the government, to the EEOC, to show like what their demographics look like, to make sure they're not discriminating. The challenge with EEO1 reports, and I was going to talk about this some tonight, but I'm still doing research, is that they don't show everybody, right? A lot of people aren't represented in those reports, and even still, 17 companies chose not to share those reports. And to this day, many companies won't share their EEO1s. In 2012, Ellen Powell, snaps to Ellen, filed a gender discrimination lawsuit against Kleiner Perkins. She ultimately lost her case 3 years later, despite an outside investigation substantiating her claims. Right, so Ellen is one of the few people who actually took her case to trial instead of settling, and she still lost, right? And so that's challenging for all of us. 2013, Tracy asks, where are the numbers? And starts collecting data about representation of women. 2014, Julianne Horvath is harassed out of GitHub. And I want to just pause here to talk about the Time Person of the Year thing today, because I was in my feelings about that this morning. I'm going to be in my feelings about it right now. I'm going to have some wine first, and then we're going to talk about it. They call it the Person of the Year the Silence Breakers. And that's saying that Julie, that Adria, that Ellen, that Kelly, that none of the women who have spoken up before 2017 did what they did, right? We're not acknowledging or recognizing them. And so it's great that the people who spoke up in 2017 are being recognized, but the silence was not broken just this year. And so that is my problem with that whole situation, and I just wanted to talk about it. We're gonna move on.
Trump runner-up.
What's that?
They named Trump runner-up.
I mean, we don't say his name. 45. Or like tiny hands, whatever. In May of 2014, Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push began asking tech companies to release their employee demographics. If y'all don't know who Jesse Jackson is, he has several major political connections. Jesse, what I have not mentioned here, is that Jesse, because of his major political connections, could make companies not get their legislation passed. He could influence the Congressional Black Caucus and influence lawmakers to not do things that those tech companies wanted. Those tech companies were afraid. Jesse has a lot of power, and so in May of 2014, Google releases their first diversity report, admitting that it's not where it wants to be on diversity, right? Because Jesse scared the shit out of them. Because remember, back in 2008 and 2011, they weren't trying to talk about it. And as a person who used to work at Google and was at Google during those times, they wouldn't even talk about it internally, right? And so Jesse did some great work there, and I appreciate him. So if you ever see him in the street, just thank him for that, because we would not have diversity reports if it weren't for Jesse Jackson. In June 2014, Facebook released its first diversity report. A month later, because again, Jesse scared them. July, eBay released theirs. July, Twitter released theirs. And then Pinterest, where Tracy worked, released theirs in July also. Apple released theirs in August. Pandora released theirs in August. Indiegogo released theirs in August. And in September, Google started doing unconscious bias training as part of its solution to improving diversity. And the rest of the tech industry, because of the cargo culting I mentioned before, followed suit. And so now we see everybody doing an unconscious bias training when it's not really that effective. I heard a laugh. It is funny. I wish they would get better. In October, Satya Nadella, at Grace Hopper of all places, suggested that women should not ask for raises, and they should instead trust in karma, and that the right things would happen if they just trusted in karma. That's not how I got promoted or got any of my jobs. Karma was not what did that, that was me. He later apologized. Thank you. He later apologized for this because he got slaughtered in the media and by every woman in tech that I know for saying that. So props to y'all. In November of 2014, Amazon released its first diversity report, still in 2014, like Jesse Jackson effect still in play. Then Googler, Erica Baker, that's me, writes about her experiences being a black woman in the tech industry. Noting specific experiences at Google, Google chooses not to comment. Thanks, Google. Appreciate that. In January of 2015, Microsoft released its EEO1 report. Remember, in 2008 was the first time they got asked for it. So 7 years later, they did it. In March of 2015, Kelly Ellis goes on record about her sexual harassment at Google. Google chooses not to comment. Thanks, Google. That's me talking to the camera because this is going online and I want them to know that I'm talking to them. In July of 2015, Google Photos, echoing a well-worn racist and derogatory term, labels Black people as gorillas. And Google issues an apology, finally. So there's the one apology that Google ever issued about any of the messed up stuff that they've done, because they got called on it and it was gonna get really big if they didn't fix it. In September 2015, Mark Benioff says on stage at Dreamforce that their major focus right then is working on the women's issue, meaning that Salesforce was intentionally not focusing on any other group, any other demographic, but women, right? And that might be great for people who are white women, but people who are people of color were like, what? What up, Mark? What's going on with that? Like every person at Salesforce who is a person of color, when I called him out for this, came up to me later and was like, thank you for saying that, because we're not allowed to say that to him. That was fucked up, as it was. In January 2016, Google released its most recent diversity report, showing no improvement from its 2014 report, save a 1% increase in women. 2 years. In March, and we'll get back to that in a second. In March of 2016, Emily recounted her experience of racism and sexism at Squarespace, and they did not apologize. And in fact, if I remember correctly, they pretended like she didn't experience the things that she did. They gaslighted her, and that was terrible. In December of 2016, ABI released its first diversity report. ABI, the people who put on Grace Hopper, waited until 2016 to release their diversity report. Just note that. Again, diversity. In February of 2017, Susan Fowler recounted her experiences of harassment at Uber. And then right after, Uber began an investigation of those experiences that she mentioned. And then in 2017, Uber released its first diversity report. And Uber had been a company for like 3 or 4 years by this point, and this is the first time. In June, Lyft released its first diversity report. Shout out to Lyft for doing that. And then Square, and then Uber released the results of Eric Holder's investigation. Those are pretty substantial results, because in June of 2017, this year, Travis Kalanick resigned, although for some reason he's still around. I don't understand. So getting back up to this one, where Google showed no improvement, and this is why I boggle at the $500 million spent on diversity and inclusion. Google, in the past 3 years, has hired roughly 30,000 people. If 8% of that 30,000 people were people of color, they could have doubled the representation of people of color at their company. 8%, tiny. Like if you can't do 8% return on your investment, like you're fired, your project is terrible, yeah. And so that Google hasn't done this means to me that they aren't really working on it. Right, so action items. Define good outcomes and goals. It is a type prevent. Most tech companies should be doing it. And it's still in progress. Track and report retention across demographics, track and report promotion rates across demographics, track and report company equity, and breakdowns across demographics. And I want to talk about this one, specifically company equity, because equity in a company defines who gets rich in this industry, right? If you don't have a lot of equity in those companies that are having those big exits with lots of money, you're not getting rich. But you know who is getting rich? The white dudes who were hired at the beginning of the company. And those people go on to create more companies where they then perpetuate the same sexism, racism, homophobia, ageism, everything. And so we need to really work on that one so that we can see people who aren't white dudes getting the money to start the companies. That may look a little different. Track and report pay equity, implement all suggestions from Uber's firm. Again, those are very good. I suggest you read them if you haven't. Sorry, I'm talking very fast. I have 10 minutes, I think, and so I'm trying to blow through this. Move diversity and inclusion out of HR, PR, finance, and et cetera, and into its own org reporting directly to the CEO. And the reason why I say move it out of these organizations is because these orgs have all their own things they want to do. They have their own biases. HR thinks that, reports of harassment need to be solved by HR, and that means, going out and doing an investigation and treating the person who's reporting them like they're liars, and coming back and saying, oh, we couldn't substantiate your claim because you didn't write it down, or because it wasn't documented anywhere. Oh, there wasn't pictures. Oh, there's nobody who will say that you experienced what you did, which results in a feeling of gaslighting. Also, there are several other reasons. Namely, the biggest one is because the CEO is the person who sets strategy for the entire company. And if you are in HR, PR, finance, you are beholden to their strategy. So move them out of those organizations and make diversity its own organization. Implement unconscious bias training, even though it is not good, because it is the first step. It's like preschool, diversity preschool. You need preschool before you get to kindergarten. But definitely implement ally skills training. Shout out to Lee, who's in the audience. Where you at, Lee? Definitely implement ally skills, racial justice training. You got to teach people why they should be thoughtful about people from different backgrounds, right? And make all of it mandatory. And everybody's like, oh, you shouldn't make it mandatory. You shouldn't make people go to these things they don't want to go to. No, the people who go to the trainings when it's optional are the people who already know, right? But the people who need to be there don't show up, so make it mandatory. Define and make available to the entire company a playbook for responding to issues. And I mean, when someone comes to X manager and says, yo, my teammate just tried to grope me, right? That manager needs to be ready and say, okay, we need to go to HR. This is what we're gonna do. This is the plan. A lot of managers don't have that right now, and they don't know what to do. And the first response is like, oh, did you talk to them about it? No. Why would I talk to them about it, right? So make that available to managers so they have a tool set. They're people too, and sometimes they just need guidance. Implement the recommendations in projectinclude.org. That's a little plug from a group. Yeah, Project Include is a set of guidelines for startups on how to build diverse and inclusive companies. So implement that. Implement innovative recruiting practices instead of relying on overused standards, like maybe recruit from somewhere besides Stanford, Berkeley, Cal, CMU, MIT. Go to somewhere where people of color are, where, any of the HBCUs, honestly. Or places where you don't necessarily land when you're flying from San Francisco to New York. Maybe go to some of those places, because other people are there too. Who here is from some place that's not on the coast? Exactly. As Frida K4 Klein says, genius is not apportioned by zip code, right? Geniuses are everywhere. Y'all are all geniuses. Own it. Implement, or rather hire more URMs, especially into executive and board positions. Give us power, y'all. And I mean underrepresented minorities to include people of color, women, people of different genders, all of us. Give us the power, because we don't have it right now. And what I'm trying to do right now, in case y'all aren't aware, my #1 goal is to shift power from the group that has it, white men, to those who don't. I want power to be evenly distributed. So, current resolution, there is none. The failure is still ongoing. And supporting information, there's a link to the Ally Skills workshop put on by both Val and Lee, and y'all should check it out. Shout out to that. Lee says the Ally Skills workshop is Creative Commons licensed, and anyone can teach it. That means you. So teach an Ally Skills workshop at your job, at your job, or get a white dude to do it. All right. The last slide is not that important. I'm gonna see if I can get back to it really quick. If not, whatever, it's no big deal. Nope, okay, give up. That picture's awesome. But anyway, I'm Erica. That's what the last slide says. My Twitter is Erica Joy. If I knew how to get back to it, I would, but technology is hard. Let's go shopping. You can find me on Twitter at Erica Joy. You can email me at hello@ericabaker.com. Warning, I am extremely slow to respond to emails. Twitter is better. Twitter is what I check the most, mostly, usually, not lately, but you know, that's the best way to get to me. And also, talk to me if you want to work at Patreon. We're hiring. And if you don't want to talk to me now, totally respect that. Erica@patreon.com if you want to work there. Thank you. Am I doing Q&A?
What?
Am I doing Q&A or no?
Do you want to do Q&A?
I can. I don't know.
Do you want Q&A? Yes.
Okay.
Was that your GitHub?
Yeah, that was my GitHub. I'm github.com/EricaJoy, and I think it's under the repo Tech Diversity. Again, super professional with mine. I'm gonna not stand there anymore. That's weird.
So I am an engineer at Google, and I help out with recruiting and stuff. And I've asked
I'm
HR.
sorry.
I've asked HR why are you doing like 10 events at Cal and Stanford? Because I'm in New York, so they always ask for like help. And they're like, well, there's kids there too that need to know about Google. Or I'm like, can you help me explain why is there money? Like, why are you spending money on this? Like, you could easily take this infrastructure you've built for this program and easily go to another school, and these kids would still be applying. Have you like asked that question? How else do I ask that question?
I don't think it is a good use of your time to ask Google that question. Google will not be changing. Google is very set in its ways. And I don't think that you'll ever see them shift away from doing the events at Stanford, at CMU, MIT, all those. Like, if they do, I will give you $100. I don't ever expect them to shift away from it. It's just like the Google culture is very much like, oh, we get the best of the best, and the best of the best come from these schools only, because they think that only the people who can afford to go to those schools or are aware of those schools or have the right, demographic for those schools are the best. They haven't let. Go ahead.
Then you talk about like cargo culting and stuff. So how do we make sure that other companies don't follow suit and like continue to spend money on those programs?
So people at other companies that are smaller and not so set in their ways, because Google's been around for a long time, speak up about it. Early on, if you're at a startup, tell them, we need to go recruit at other schools. Figure out how to reach out to the Black student unions, the Hispanic student unions, the women's groups, every group that represents someone from a URM, from an underrepresented group in tech. Figure out how to reach them at campuses that other companies don't go to. And you know what? You will get better engineers as a result, because everybody is going to Stanford, and everybody is going to Berkeley, and everybody is going to the standard schools. But if you go and find those people from those schools that aren't well represented in the tech industry, you will get really smart, talented people who are grateful that you see them.
Moneyball.
Yes, Moneyball.
You're an engineering manager. I'm a new engineering manager. 5 months old, and it's been interesting. And I have a woman and man both reporting to me. And I get a lot of feedback that you're too aggressive in meetings, and you need to tone it down, and today actually I got feedback from someone who reports to me, said you're too aggressive in meetings, and then I got a feedback and I talked to my other person who reports to me, and she's like, but that's the same thing that your manager does, and everyone's okay with it, but they're not okay when you do that. So I'm struggling with like tone and like what do I do, and I need to keep my job and all of that other stuff. So I'm very conflicted. Like I'm always like apologizing in meetings.
Oh, don't apologize in meetings. Don't let people tone police you. I'm sorry that's happening for you. That's really crappy, and people at your company should not be doing that. A good response that I have when people say something just completely ridiculous like that is like, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? But I'm too aggressive? Can you explain more? And they start talking about like what they're saying, and they realize that it's really messed up, and they're like, walk it back. They're like, oh, actually I meant blah, blah, blah. And even if they don't start walking it back, you start hearing what they're looking for, and they may trip themselves up some more and say something even worse. And then you got something to document to take to HR.
One more right here.
How do you document
How do you document what?
interactions like that? How do we document that?
You write to document interactions like that, you have the verbal conversation, and then you send a follow-up email. I heard you say this, is this what you meant? And they respond and say yes, and then you have it in writing.
Okay, one more right here.
So many of the people in tech right now, and there are some who are not this way, but many of the people in tech right now are here for the money, right? And so you start speaking to their money, right? It's like, oh, we're building, I don't know where you work, but if you're working on a product that is supposed to be for everyone, right? That is supposed to reach people of all demographics. You say, oh, well, how are we going to build, how do we know that this is going to work out well for people who aren't represented in this room, right? And then you start telling them the horror stories about HP with their camera, and Snapchat with the face filters, and Google with the tagging, right? You start telling them the stories about how it has affected the pockets of the companies that they know, and they're like, oh, we do not want our money to be affected. We should do some things to make sure that doesn't happen, right? You talk to the money for people who aren't already aligned in that way. You're welcome so much. Thank you for asking. Thank you all. Tess says I have to get off the stage, so I'm gonna go.